All right. So welcome everybody to the MILPA show. We have a special guest today, Fred Clay. I'm going to pass it on over to my co-host Bernie, and my name is Rosaura Figueroa Mendoza. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, what's up, gente? Rosaura, gracias for that. Hey, today we have a cool ass dude on the show, right? Mr. Fred Clay. But first and foremost, though, my name is Bernie Gomez, and it's a pleasure to be here again with y'all. Trying to do the best we can here, right? Going to stay with this platform, highlighting important folks. And again, I mean, anytime, folks, that you guys are watching this, anytime you feel like, hey, you know what, that person right there should be a good person for y'all to, just hit us up, and we'll try to make that happen. We're always trying to be as much involved with the comunidad, and maybe the community can help us with a little bit of that work. You know what I'm saying? Like, but to get this going, it's like like it is customary here, a little quick check-in. Mr. Clay, what do you do for fun?
Surf. I'm an avid surfer, outdoorsman. I like to be out in the ocean, surfing the waves. I live in Santa Cruz, California, so about 3 blocks from the beach. So every chance I get, I go surfing.
Yay. Thank you, Fred. What about you, Bernie? What do you do for fun?
Man, what do I do for fun? I wish I could say I surf too, because I live in Santa Cruz and by the beach también, right? I've gone out there, but that's kind of dangerous. So I'm gonna say, when I can, I like to go snowboard because I'm a better at that. I can actually stand on the board, right? Be on it, but I like to do, just anything that has to do with like open space, right? Just based on like years of incarceration and being locked in a freaking box, um, it's like, and then sometimes, yeah, just enjoying space, enjoying freedom right now. It's like, that's what I like to do for fun.
Orale. So since we're going with the extreme sports, I like bike riding. It's not an extreme sport, but it's fun. I think bike riding is always really fun. You could pop in some music and just kind of ride around, and that's always a really good activity and exercise. But yeah, thank y'all for sharing. And I know, Fred, you had shared before. Is there anything in particular about surfing that for you is like really fun or engaging, or why, do you recommend it to other folks?
I definitely recommend it for a number of reasons. Most people associate um, surfing, with Kelly Slater or these people of European descent. Well, actually, surfing originated in Hawaii, and it was a sport of kings by people of color, brown skinned people. And I'd really love to see more Black and brown youth and adults surfing, in this Santa Cruz community to diversify the water as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for bringing your energy. I know that once we get together in person again, it's going to be a whole different thing, but we try our best via Zoom to just try to bring in folks and create a platform for people to tell their stories. And so if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and what it was like growing up.
Thank you, Rosario, for asking that question, and you too, Bernie. I grew up in a single mother home. My mom, she was 17. As a matter of fact, she was pregnant with me at her senior prom. There's a picture with my mom and my uncle at my mom's senior prom, belly all big. And that was in early June, maybe late May when she went to her prom. And I was born on June, in mid to late June. So it was kind of funny. A lot of the challenges we see in our communities, of Black and brown communities, resided in my home. As a result, my mom being a, early mother, my dad, for some of the disparities and the challenges of being a man of color, in the mid 70s, he wasn't able to be around. I attribute a lot of that to his father not being present in his life. My dad growing up, actually graduating from a segregated high school in West Texas. So my dad, had a hard time. And unfortunately, he wasn't around in my life. But going back to my mom, being an early mother, she was the youngest of 4. And her other siblings had already gone out of the house and have gone out to the world to, pursue their careers, build their families, and so forth. So actually, I grew up with my mom and my grandmother, my mother's mother. So it was I was a bit of a throwback because My mom's mom was kind of my mom too. So a lot of the training and teaching, I have are more associated with the older generation, a lot of traditional values and so forth and so on. And that's directly related to my mom being a teenage mother and me actually literally growing up in my mother's home. I remember my mom, she didn't move out of my grandmother's house until my early teens. So all of my formative years were literally in my grandmother's house. Very, very important. Um, the next thing, we have nature and nurture. Okay. We have the nature part. My mom was a teenage mother. She stayed at home till she was able to get herself together financially. As a result, I was raised in a very matriarchal home, my mom and my grandmother. And that's the nature part. The nurture part is the environment that I grew up in. Now, I was born in 1976. Okay. The heroin epidemic in America just passed. We had gotten over Vietnam. The community was healing from that. I was coming of age in the 80s, the mid to late 80s. I graduated out of middle school in 89, 90. So that's the height of the crack epidemic. And let's talk about my environment. I grew up in Stockton. People may not know this about Stockton, but in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, Stockton was rated by Forbes magazine as the worst city, one of the worst cities in the United States to live. Crime, just, through the roof, right? I can't call it the murder capital of the United States, but, definitely topping the chart. A lot of drugs, but that's not the foundation of the city. And actually, Stockton, when I was coming of age, was on a decline. And why so? During the time, both sides of my family, my mother's side and my father's side, they both come from Texas. My dad, West Texas. My mother's side of the family, East Texas. So they were a group of folks coming out of the South during World War II down into LA. When World War II came to a conclusion, they went to what they did back in Texas. They worked in the fields. They started working the fields. They migrated from Los Angeles up the Central Valley, Madera, Fresno, Lodi, Manteca, all the way to Stockton. What they found out when they arrived in Stockton was that all work in the fields, cutting lettuce, topping onions, picking tomatoes, cherries, plums, apricots, peaches, so forth. Agricultural people on both sides of my family. When they came to Stockton, what they found was there were crops year round to harvest to make their living. These are my grandparents, so they're in their mid 20s when they first come to Stockton. Well, over a period of time, they did seasonal work in the canneries. So they work in the fields for some seasons, the high money seasons, and then they go to process the produce in the canneries. Well, over a period of years, here comes my aunts and uncles, here comes my mom, and now we're in the 70s when I was born. So give you a little bit of background how we came to Stockton. Now, why was Stockton going through a process of urban decay? If we understand what urban decay is because there was a whole generation, my grandparents' generation, that came to Stockton. There was abundance of work. My grandparents were able to own and purchase several homes, rent out, 2 or 3 homes besides the one that they lived in, just from working in the cannery, just from working in the fields and being good with their money. How was that possible? There was living wages. There were unions. Stockton was surrounded by canneries, so work was abundant. So you had all these people, black and brown, Filipino, UFW, all these things are happening in Stockton during the 60s. People are making lots of money, building homes, having families, kids, everything, everybody going to school. Folks are doing well. Well, early 80s, some of those canneries started to shut down, cut down, start laying a lot of folks off. Urban decay. So what we know, less money coming in. What are folks doing? Getting into drugs, pacifying, their sadness and their misery, drugs and alcohol. You got a bunch of wayward kids getting out there, getting bad. Okay. That's what the environment that I ended up growing up in the 80s. Okay, I give an example of the scale of debauchery, that I grew up in, the cesspool. When I was in the 7th and 8th grade, I had friends that would literally go across into the housing projects across the street from my middle school and sell crack. They go sell some crack, sell some rocks, make some money on their lunch, and come back by the next period. Okay, myself, I got into so many fights. They put me on like a minimum day. I was renting out lockers. I had a locker that I just kept bats and pipes in, because at that time we're having lots of riots, getting into fights, hitting people over the head, guys from the high school coming over there, to harass us and da 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 da. So if that gives you an example of the type of environment that I grew up in, I'd say 8 out of 10 of my friends grew up in single parent homes. I'd say 6 out of 10 homes had a parent or several family members that were severely addicted to crack cocaine. And I grew up with the older guys in the community, selling crack to their friends' moms and their friends' dads, and so I kind of grew up in that environment. I remember one of my buddies, his name was Darren. We used to call rent cars. All renting car was is give somebody a bag of dope and they let you borrow their car. This guy was in the 8th grade and he gave some dope fiend a bag of crack, and for I don't know a couple of weeks he was just driving to school, and he'd come to school every day and driving the car in the 8th grade. So that's a kind of environment that I grew up in. Bloods and Crips were really, really huge at the time. So you had young men of color shooting each other, just based over color, not even money or not even hood. They're fighting over a block that they don't even own. The county owns it, projects, right? So that's where I grew up in Stockton. Now, people might ask, like, the statistics for me at that time was I wasn't supposed to make it out of past 25 without being dead, HIV positive, or in jail, like 80%. What were some of the redeeming qualities? Big redeeming quality. And this is where Bernie mentions culture, is that I grew up in a traditional house. My folks being Afro-Indigenous people all the way back, there was a strong connection to the earth, a strong commitment to family. Two things to remember, 2 C's: connection to earth, commitment to family. Now, why is it important? And how is it kind of the saving grace? Well, the commitment to earth is probably one of the things that brought me to the ocean, taking me on several different continents all over the world, backpacking and traveling. I consider myself a bit of a gardener. My house is full of house plants. If I had land, I'd probably have fields and all kind of trees and orchards and all kind of food. But connection to land, in our home there was always a garden. When my grandparents moved into their homes, they always planted several varieties of fruit trees. They made like a little Garden of Eden, so to speak. Why is that? For self-sufficiency. Because bar any situation, there's always a tree to pick fruit from. If you can buy a seed and you can plant it and you can nurture it, just like the human being, if you can water a seed, nurture a seed, provide for it, it's going to yield something of substance, just like a person. And so that was always around. Planting, growing, harvesting, preparing. That part was always around. And understanding, a reminder that the Son of God, may not be a physical being that we read about in a book, but it might just be that big yellow thing in the sky. And somehow, some way, very clearly, that beyond any kind of story that was written by man, coming out of any book, there are things that we can touch, we can see, that we can feel, that nourish us, that feed us, that support us. And so it was really clear. You got the sun, the earth, the water, the air, those kind of 4 foundational elements. So I kind of always grew up with those kind of stories and that kind of understanding around me. So connection to earth, saving grace, commitment to family. How did that play into the process? Well, my mom being 17, kid, not even out of high school when she had me. Well, the commitment to family was that she had 2 older sisters and an older brother. And as a matter of fact, her sister's husband is the one that took her to her prom that I'm in that picture with, all big in her belly. That's a
You were on
commitment.
the dance floor, huh?
Literally, before I even came out. And so that commitment to family, and that was one of her sister's husbands. Her other sister's husband, his name was Fred, who I'm named after. He was so supportive during that time. She chose to name me after him. So despite my father not being present or active in my life, I had my uncles, both on my mom's side of my family and my dad's side of the family, kind of coming together, right? So that's a commitment to family. So again, those 2 C's, connection to earth, commitment to family. That's a foundation of how I was able to navigate myself out of the quagmire that Stockton was when I was there as a result of urban decay. So that's kind of the foundation of where I came from. And then there's other phases, to the story. But I'm going to open up the door for, you guys to ask some questions.
Yeah. Navigating the adverse childhood experiences, right? It is our understanding that you do have some academic background. Maybe tell us like what you studied, right? And at what point did you figure like, hey, education is important right now. I really need to go and get my education in order to advance in this society, right? So maybe providing a little bit of a timeline and maybe thinking back to that moment where it was like that spark, boom, you know what, I need to do something, and then your trajectory towards school.
Thank you, Bernie, for asking that question. And again, it all has to do with my family. And I'm going to talk about go back to those roots. The first generation to come to California, neither one of my grandparents had the opportunity to even go to middle school. I was the first in my mom's family to go to college. Most of them, my mom was pregnant with me her senior year. Her other siblings that graduated from high school, and that was it. So I was literally like first generation college student. So you had all my aunts and uncles, my grandparents saying, look, you're going to make a better life for yourself. I've worked hard so that you would have an opportunity that I didn't have. Mind you, my dad, he graduated from a segregated high school. That was his generation. The generation before that, they were one generation out of slavery. So when my grandmother and my grandfather were like elementary, middle school, they were already cooking and cleaning for people of European descent as a way of making money that prevented them from going to school. So education and academics was always really, really, really big in my household as a way of moving things forward generationally. My grandparents, they didn't even get to go to middle school, let alone graduate. So their children went to high school, they finished up high school. The expectation was I would go to college and finish college. So that was always a big push. I saw academics and athletics as my way out of my circumstance and my situation. I didn't want to be a burden to my family. I wanted folks to be proud of me. So, I played a lot of football, lifted a lot of weights, ran a lot of track, and studied my butt off in high school so that I could, go to college. And so I went from Stockton. I graduated from Lincoln High School in 1994. In 1994, I went to San Jose State, played football there 1 year, blew out my knee. And then I finished up, with a degree in environmental science with the emphasis in education. and a minor in philosophy. And it goes back to that early concept, connection to earth. I already understood the symbiotic relationship, but now maybe it's turned into a parasitic relationship between humans and the earth. But from an indigenous perspective, it's a symbiotic relationship. Um, and so I wanted to use my knowledge and my love for nature, indigenous lifestyle, indigenous ways of being, and that's why I got my degree in environmental science, because essentially it was a stamp of approval or certificate to make a living doing the things that I enjoy and already have the knowledge for. But I just needed certification so people would believe me, and so I got my undergrad in environmental science. So go back to that connection to earth and
Yeah.
commitment to family. I remain very committed to moving my family forward intergenerationally and helping others do so as well. And thank you for asking me about the timeline, Bernie. I finished up at San Jose State in 1999. The first part of my career was in education. I had spent 3 years doing academic support programs in communities of color intentionally, because one of the things I noticed is that through my high school, my middle school and high school career, I had two African American male teachers, for over a 6 year period, and maybe one or two African American female teachers. And so I wanted to give back. I wanted to be a mentor, a tangible example of what other Black and Brown Indigenous youth can do. So the first part of my career was in education. I had an epiphany. You asked me at what stage did I have an epiphany? It was in middle school. I stabbed a kid when I was in the 7th grade, and actually it was kind of like the last week of 7th grade. The guy had been bullying me. One day he jumps out of a tree at the bus stop, hits me with a stick, and I stuck him and went to juvenile hall. When I returned to school in the 8th grade, I was just the king. I was the king of the hill. I was like, oh, damn, that's Fred. He did that. And that kind of set me up for a certain type of persona. But I had some mentors that let me know that I was more than that persona, that I was capable of more than beating up people. I was capable of more than selling drugs. I was capable of more than making children early, and disciplined myself that I could go to college and I can change my circumstance so that another young man, my progeny, wouldn't have to go through the experience that I went through. And that, as a matter of fact, not only would that be good for me, but I would turn into a living example of what's possible for the Black, Brown, and Indigenous youth that came after me, or that my life brought me, to cross paths with. That makes sense. Brought me the presence of. And so there was a teacher, that kind of inspired me in that way in middle school. So talk about that switch happened in middle school, Burns. And as a result, when I graduated from San Jose State, I geared my attention to providing that sort of example and mentorship to young men and young women at the middle school age, because I thought that by the time they hit high school, their patterns are already set, their minds are already made, they're more malleable, and I could really identify them because of the experiences that I had. So, thank you for asking.
Surviving your circumstances and conditions. That really stood out, because that's like circumstances and conditions that Black and Brown folks face every day, right? And this is not, I was born in the 80s. So I was totally like, I just basically went down memory lane from your lens, right? And really, besides the mentorship, right, everything else, really, it was just really resonated. And I guess, you have this academic background, you come from these adverse childhood experiences, right? Maybe give us a little background as to how was your being Black Indigenous man, right, back then. What was it? What was the difference between then and now? Is it still everything that, like, kind of the same, or is actually the people a little banded together more now than before, or is there more systemic racism than before? Is there more bias going around? Like, what's your take in regards to your identity from now and then?
Wonderful question. I'm gonna start with myself, and then I'll move outwards. Well, I kind of walk through the world a little bit different. I always had like a different lens, right? And my different lens was directly related to the connection with the earth and the commitment to family. And mind you, since my mom was a teenage mom, in more ways than one, I was raised by her mother. So my values are a generation earlier than my own. So and I grew up in a very traditional house. And what did that look like? My aunt wore a white dress when my mom's oldest sister, she wore a white dress when she got married. She deserved to wear the white dress, for those who understand.
Mm.
So I grew up in a very traditional home. And what was it, Bernie? Could you refresh the question? I
I
kind of got
guess,
lost in my own thoughts.
yeah, I guess maybe explain like a little, like, has there been a difference
Oh
or
yes.
increase in
Oh.
racism, right? Be coming from stock.
Question. Now, has it increased? I would say no. Has it evolved? Absolutely. I wouldn't say it's increased. I think it's always been there and it's always been significant. Now, like I go back to my dad growing up in a segregated high school. Okay. Now, are the schools integrated? Yes. Are the lowest performing schools in Black and Brown and Indigenous communities? Yes. So, I mean, even though like there's integration, we're not doing that much better. I'll give you a little bit about the history of Stockton. Redlining was real in Stockton. In my parents' generation, you could not buy homes north of what we call March Lane. There was literal highways and train tracks that separated the Black and Brown communities from the white communities. It was very real. Institutionalized systemic racism was very much a part of Stockton then and Stockton today, America then and America today. Now, has it changed? Absolutely, it has. Are the majority of homeowners in Santa Cruz County of European descent? Yes, they are. What's the population of original inhabitants, indigenous people in Santa Cruz County? Less than 1%. And that's not by accident. Half of the population in Santa Cruz County, documented population, according to the census, is brown, Spanish speaking. They are surely not half of the teacher, not half of the principal, not half of the business owners, not half of the firemen, not half of the nurses, but they are all of the people harvesting the artichokes. They're all 100% of the people harvesting the blueberries. They're 100% of the people processing and packaging the spinach, the kale. 80% of the people preparing that Chinese meal that most folks ate last week, even that sushi. But they're surely not 50% of the owners of those restaurants. So that is to say that racism, systemic racism, is very much a part of American society. San Joaquin County that I grew up in, and Santa Cruz County that I live in. When I go down to the water and I go surfing, 90% of the time, I am the only man of color in the water. And they're not used to that. And it's only because of my size and the way that I carry myself and I hold space that they don't bother me and make me feel significantly uncomfortable. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yeah, no, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Fred. And I wanted to just go back to when you were talking about being able to sow seeds and be able to have a garden, because my mom has my parents have aguacate and apples and different like fruits and whatnot. And so it is really important and I always grew up with it, so I never really thought too much about it. But now that you said, yeah, it's for self-sufficiency, it makes sense, right? Like our people, that's just part of the culture, is to have a relationship with the earth. And for my mom, like that's a huge, like gardening is really important for her. Like that's her way of meditation and getting in touch with just relaxing and whatnot. So I just wanted to shout you out for mentioning that's just a part of the culture, right? And another thing in terms of like mentorship, that like your mentors, like there was mentors or teachers in your life when you were like in middle school, like 8th grade or so going into high school, that expected something of you that sometimes the reality didn't expect of you, or didn't promote for you a better life, or a better, like, that you are smart and that you are capable and that you can do a lot of different, you have a lot of different abilities, and whatever it is that you want to do, you could do it. And so I just want to highlight that, as sometimes as young people, we don't, it takes a while to find those mentors. And it is really, really important to have those people in our lives that believe it in us more than we believe in ourselves, right? That they push us forward and whatnot. And so I just appreciate you mentioning that. But even right now, when you're mentioning surfing, and I know you've told us a story about how you met Juan and while you were surfing and whatnot, and maybe that's the connection, right? It's the nature, like nature, we come back to nature, right? Of being able to talk about how you surfing and meeting Juan, and now you're our board chair, right, for like MILPA. So if you could talk a little bit more about that story, and how it is that you came to be the MILPA board chair, and what does it mean to have that responsibility as a board chair of MILPA?
All right. So there's several parts to that question, and so I might ask you to remind me of the separate parts, because I'm gonna start piece by piece. So I met Juan Gomez 10 or 12 years ago here in Santa Cruz. I was coming in from a surf, and it's kind of just, if a person is surfing over there, I moved to Santa Cruz in 2000. So I've been in this community surfing for 20 years. And when another person of color, is there, yes, it's just kind of my standard to speak, to at least acknowledge. And so I saw Juan, he was surfing, and we're coming out of the water, and I just kind of nodded, kind of said, "What's up?" Well, I'm back in my car getting changed, getting fixed up, and he comes over and he brings a he brings some sage, and gives me some sage. And I thought to myself, like, I don't know this guy. And he's like, who is this guy? Because I've been participating in Native American ceremony, and sweat lodges and NAC meetings and so forth, different things, for some time. And I was like, I never knew this guy, but it was kind of serendipitous. It was how God works through things. And he gave me a bundle of sage, and he's like, here, brother, some medicine for you. And so that's how I met Juan Gomez. And then you asked me about what motivated me to become board chair, or go ahead.
Yeah, essentially how did we go from, okay, cool, like, what's up, bro, like, let me give you some sage, to, like, you said that was 10-12 years ago, right? And now I would imagine that you've been a part of the movement in some way or another, because now you're the MILPA board chair, right? And so I guess just learning a little bit more of that trajectory of, like, what made you, or motivated you to want to say yes to becoming the MILPA board chair.
What motivated me to say yes? There's a need, right? Racism exists in people's hearts and people's minds. Our society's founded by European people for European people. Let us let's remember that Native people weren't even considered humans or citizens at the founding of this country. African slaves that they kidnapped from their country as skilled labor were considered, not quite human when they wrote that Constitution and those laws. So that's the foundation of our country. So until they change the Constitution and the foundation, the fruit is going to still bear poison fruit, right? Just the way it is. There's a need for change. Like I said, the first part of my career was kind of in direct services, being the change that I want to see, providing the tangible access for Black and Brown youth, to engage me, or for me to engage to create that change. At some point, I realized that what I was dealing with was a larger system. That larger system would need some significant changes. And hence I went and got my MBA in sustainable management. And I said, well, you know what? The more people I can impact, through entrepreneurialism, financial resources, commitment to climate change, resource preservation, which are the hallmarks of Indigenous living and Indigenous practice, would allow me to have the impact in the world that I was seeking. Well, my career has brought me in different places, managing, directing various academic support services in Black and Brown communities, supporting nonprofit organizations in their operations, using my business acumen to support them. And over the last 10 years, I've been a project manager in residential and commercial construction. So what motivated me to become the board chair for MILPA is the fact that my day-to-day, my 9 to 5, isn't geared towards service, or benefiting people or planet. And so this is my commitment to the change for racial justice, to reduce the sentencing associated with Black and brown youth. We know that, we had a kid up in Stanford, raped an old girl, and he didn't serve any time because they're like, he's too rich to understand the consequences of his action.
Right.
Whereas how many, African American and Spanish men have
like
been
the Central
sentenced
Park Five, like those
exactly
kids, those
right.
kids were demonized.
Yeah, and completely innocent, hung, incarcerated for their lives were ruined because a Karen, a woman of European descent, made an allegation. Was it Medgar Evers that he got beat to death during the civil rights era, and the girl on her deathbed says, "Well, it didn't even happen. I'm so sorry." So, right now, like I said, my 9 to 5 is, I work with a company, great company, good people, but it's not in directly supporting the people of the movement. And so this is my way of giving back and continuing to support.
Yeah, no, talking about white supremacy and white privilege, right? Maybe give us in your own words, like what's the importance of history and culture?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So if we go back to me kind of starting out in middle school as a teacher, a math and science teacher, well, you got to remember that the Europeans, they wanted to say that it was aliens that built the pyramids. In Mexico or Africa, they don't want to give us a credit for being amazing engineers, mathematicians. I mean, they thought they were doing something good when they did some kind of bamboozling and switched from the lunar calendar to the Gregorian calendar and went from a 28-day cycle to like a 31-day cycle, which doesn't really work, right? They thought they were cool. They can only come up with a calendar that goes 31 days, 365. You got to remember, in Mexico, they had 1,000-year calendar, right? So going back to history, we have to acknowledge the fact that the first 12 years of American education is not education, but indoctrination. Remember, we have George Washington and various other early presidents on the faces of our money venerated as heroes. They were all slave owners and rapists. Let's just be factual. Abusive people, physically, mentally, emotionally. They made their off stealing the lands from the native and getting the blacks to work for them, the African. The importance of history to know that. The importance of history to know that in Mexico City, there were floating gardens. So not only did they know agriculture, they had an understanding of engineering, advanced engineering.
Yeah, the chinampas.
Right? How do you build a pyramid where you can't slip a piece of paper through, that are essentially impermeable to earthquakes? Well, our ancestors were doing it in the Americas and in Africa. The street light that we use today was invented by an African American man. The gas mask that saves thousands of lives annually, invented by a Black man. The washing machine that gives us convenience and clean clothes, invented by Black men. The cellular phone, the internet, invented by Black people. I'm not going to tell you that part. Not going to tell you that potatoes, the French fry, we associate American mashed potatoes. Where does that come from? Peru. Tomatoes, Central America. Chile, Central America. Corn that feeds the world, Central and South America. They're not going to tell you that. Okay. So why is it important to understand the dynamics of the society that we live in? When they created the educational system, they created themselves to be the gods, literally, the source of logic, the source of reason, so that psychologically, emotionally, we would submit. That's why they painted Jesus white. Let's just talk about it. That's why they took our language and our history, so they can create their own, a fallacy and a lie. Why is it important to understand that we have a lot of work to do? Because we have to sift through the lie, and we have to deal with cognitive dissonance. We have to deal with other community members, even family members, that don't want to accept that fact, that blue-eyed Jesus is not the real Jesus, is a
White
figment
savior
of their
complex.
creation. Okay.
It's tough with a Catholic mother that's like super devout. It's like, yeah, I feel it.
Right. And so, and that's the importance and the challenge, the blessing and the curse of understanding these concepts, is that we get a certain level of liberation, but with that liberation comes isolation. Hence why, I chose to accept the nomination for board chair, because MILPA and the staff at MILPA, they're committed to those sort of foundational truths that will lead to the large scale liberation of ourselves individually and collectively.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I definitely appreciate that. And yeah, I'm thinking about my own family and how sometimes I feel like I can't be my full self around them because sometimes they won't understand. I don't know if there's other dynamics at play, but part of it is the fact that I like to talk about subjects such as these, like history and culture. And I've had family members tell me, like, why do you want to talk about that? I don't like, why are you always trying to go deep like that? And it's like, well, that's the way I understand the world, but some people aren't ready or don't like it or don't appreciate it. So it's just interesting having to navigate that. But I think that's just like the truth of the world, right? You've been involved in Indigenous ceremony. And so my question is, because at least for myself, like I'm having started at Milpa like last March, it's going to be a year in March, right? But a lot of it is new for me, like Indigenous. And we had this plática last time in the last episode, reclaiming our indigeneity. And so it sounds like you've already been involved in Indigenous ceremony. And so have those teachings always been with you? And it sounds like they have, right? Because you identified as Afro-Indigenous. And if you can tell us a little bit more about your journey in that respect of have you always understood that you're Indigenous, or has it been a process of having to reclaim? Or if you can just tell us a little bit more about that, that would be great.
A wonderful question. I've always known it, but being the victim, and I'm very thoughtful of, and for those of out there, look up the definition, the Webster's dictionary definition of a victim. Most Black and brown men and women are victims, past and present. Okay. A victim of colonization. And then what did colonization look like for me and my family, and related to my indigeneity? My African ancestors, they were brought, they're not brought, but kidnapped from Africa and brought here. Their language, their culture was essentially stripped from them in one generation, to break them and to bring them to a place where they couldn't communicate with one another, and they'd have to be dependent on their white slave owner. My oldest known ancestor was a slave woman, purchased by a Seminole man, and there were several Indian tribes that owned slaves: Choctaw, Seminole, Creek, Cherokee, maybe a couple more. But my earliest known ancestor from Africa came off of a ship and was bought by a Seminole man. And that Seminole man had 10 children with that woman. And I'm a progeny of those children. So I'm one of the fortunate ones to know my history all the way back to that boat. Did we speak, Seminole? No, we didn't speak Seminole. Did we wear turbans and shoot muskets and bows and arrows? No, we're working folks. And but our home and our lifestyle was rooted in a level of indigeneity. We definitely, weren't and aren't your average African American home. There's subtle differences for those who know, right? And that's as a result of that indigenous Native American tradition, blood and culture. So does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's an ongoing conversation for myself. I know Like we want to do another episode on reclaiming our indigeneity, and because we only scratched the surface. We were laughing because we're like, I don't think we said anything. Like I think there's a lot more to say. And I know for myself, it's a point of it gets emotional, right? It's rough because it's like I think there's a lot of digging to do and a lot of understanding. So it's also beautiful to hear that you've been in touch. It's the history of what your people have gone through. It's tough because it's like no human should have to go through that, but at the same time, like you have an understanding of who you are and your culture. So that's beautiful to hear. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
I was just like, man, I was like, talk about Fred commanding presence, right? I was just like, I was at a seminar right now, just taking notes, you know. But it just made me think about like, yes, Rosada, we just had that episode, and yes, we mentioned like, man, what the hell did we just say? Absolutely nothing. Like, you know, it's like, but that's like the whole thing is like trying to reclaim our indigeneity. But what is that even gonna look like? And listening to you, Fred, uh, growing up with that understanding, right, of I'm gonna say like that cultural identity, right, the history, you know, the your where the lineage came from. What message would you send out today to the youth or even the folks that are just watching this, right? Um, what like call to action would you ask of them to practice to become better folks or try to become the better version of themselves, uh, just based on like what we've been hearing here is like really being in connection with your roots has really catapulted and elevated you to the best version of who you are, right?
I think my message to the youth and people watching, being Black History Month, just learn. Read some of the articles that are posted on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Um, Learn about your family history, where they come from, and keep going back generations and generations. You know, dig and find out not only like where did they come from, what did the world look like at that time. When my grandparents came to California, it was during World War II. California is very different then, right? There's 100 150 200 years between that African woman getting bought by a Seminole man in Florida, then them living and having children in Florida, then being relocated to Oklahoma. Generations and years and years and years go by before my grandfather comes to California, settles in LA, works in the ship. I mean, so go back as far as you can and look at what America was like at that time. You have to remember that it wasn't until the 60s until it was even legal for white and Black people to marry. Segregation wasn't just about Black people. Mexicans, Indians, and dogs could not go into the restaurant, right? So that would be my word of it, encouragement. Talk about learning history, learning culture, where you come from, what did the world look like, what did America look like, when those different landmarks in your family history, what did it look like? But also, that's part of healing. Culture cures, right? Well, heal yourself. Take time for your mental health. Assess your emotional health, your physical health. Some Black and brown communities that are suffering the most from diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, da 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 da. You can't do God's will if you don't have a healthy body. And even if you don't believe in God, you can't enjoy life, engage with people, do anything promising if you don't have a healthy physical body. If you're not feeling good, you sure as heck aren't thinking good. And if you're not thinking good, what comes out of your mouth is surely not good. It's going to be the symptom of the physical, mental, emotional pain that you're experiencing. Take care of your body. Take care of your mind. Take care of your heart. once you're able to get to a place of general health, and we're not even talking about the spiritual component, right? I'm going to leave that alone. But once you get to a place of general health, find someone else that's healthy. If you're a woman, find a man of color. And if you're a woman, find a man of color. Two healthy people make a healthy couple. Healthy individuals make healthy couples. Healthy couples make healthy families. Have some children. Raise a healthy family. That's how we'll build healthy communities, translate in a healthy nation, and the healthy nation sustained will be a legacy, intergenerational healing here. But we have to individually commit ourselves to that. So my message is to the man and woman, man with womb, human, dirt man, hume. Understand, there's a little code there. They gave us that. Imagine this. If the Trinity isn't Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, but man, woman, and child. Imagine the greatest type of revolution we can make is healing ourselves, coupling with another woman of color, another man of color, making children so that we can populate this earth and see the change that we need. Because what we know, there's a system of thinking that comes from Western Europe that has caused every death, disease, and pestilence that we're experiencing on the earth today. We are the solution. The healthy man, the healthy woman, the healthy family, the healthy community is a solution. Become financially stable. Once you've developed a level of mental, emotional, physical health, develop yourself financially so that you get to the point where you can take care of yourself. At the point you can take care of yourself, you have the opportunity to build excess, more, abundance. You only need 50%. You're bringing in 100, all of a sudden, you're taking care of your partner, your man or your woman. If they both come together, all of a sudden, the man needs 50%, the woman needs 50%. They're both bringing 100%. There's 100% extra. What is that extra for? Their children. The bird builds the nest before they lay their eggs. Don't have children before you're married. Set a good financial foundation for yourself. Get in a healthy and maintain a healthy relationship. Bring more children into the world. Have those children come to MILPA. Have them visit me. Have them go to ceremony. Teach them to plant gardens. Teach them to be kind and compassionate. Teach them all the things that you've learned about culture and tradition through your study, so they don't have to go through the hardship and the struggles and the trials and tribulations that I've gone through, that those that before me have gone through. Push forward little by little so that each generation that comes after us is a little better off. That would be my message.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Fred, for joining us today. And I don't have any other final word. I feel like, yeah, I guess my only question was like, I wonder what the role is of queer trans folks in the vision that you have. And I would imagine that that would be another conversation, but I'm interested to learn a little bit more. But regardless, I feel like you're setting up a foundation for especially the young people to think about, right? To consider, to really, because sometimes like we don't, like going back to the conversation, like sometimes we don't have like mentors or people that could guide us. But I just want to thank you for your time today. Appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, folks. Here you have it, Mr. Fred Clay, right? Bringing in the heat bringing in that world view, right? And again, Fred, just like Rosada said, highly appreciate, your life, your commitment and just coming on board with the Milpa crew, right? We do look forward to building relationship, right, inside and outside of that work, and yeah, folks, you guys heard it, Fred Clay, gracias.
Yee, peace.